So basically, I wanted to discuss kind of the way we have done spot checks in the past, just to kind of show what we do. Basically, we created a SharePoint list on the engineering site that this one is actually the 2021 spot checks. And anybody that's doing spot checks can go in and just add a new spot check to this list. When they do that, they'll get this form that shows, the customer name, what service center. This is a choice list of what service center they were doing the spot check on, the customer name, track field numbers, contract, the practice code, which practice code they're actually spot checking. They can enter the practice name, but it's not required. Whether or not it was done by TSP, program, if the program's apply or applies, the date that the practice was certified, who certified it, the date it was spot checked, who did the spot check. Then there's a place, the way spot checking works and the way we count practices is based on, for example, if I have a plan and the producer has 10 fields and I have 590 on those 10 fields, when I apply those 10 fields, it doesn't count as one plan, it counts as 10 590s applied. So therefore, when we do spot checks, if I pull up a plan that has 590s and I look at that plan and check those 5 fields, then I would actually count it as 5 spot checks instead of 1, because that's the way the numbers are counted as far as the totals. So basically that number checked would be, if I do 10 spot checks or 10 fields for a particular spot check, then I would count that as 10. Then there's a place that we can identify numbers that don't meet the standards and specs. And of course, if they all meet the standards and specs, you would just enter 0. Another number without adequate documentation, based on however how many I checked. If there's 10 of them and all of them don't have adequate documentation, then I would enter 10. If they all have adequate documentation, I'd enter 0. Same for all of these. You're going to put down the number that are incorrect or without adequate documentation or don't meet standards and specs or that conflict with program policy. Then if I did find some deficiencies, I would describe the deficiency in this field, mark that corrective actions are needed, and then what level that is. Is it a recommended item? Is it an agreed to item? And then at some point I could go back and document when the corrective actions were completed and a description of those. If you want to add an attachment of a form, your spot check form, you can add that. I think most people don't, but that's not really necessary, but it is a good thing to do if you wanted to. So once you've entered your spot check, you would just save that. And you can see here that there's some that have been completed. This is the 2021 spot check list. And probably the problem with SharePoint is it's a really good way to collect information. It's not a great way to analyze or print reports from that information. So what we've done with that is we've created an Access database that allows you to analyze that data and run reports on that data. So basically this tells me how many spot checked. It doesn't tell me how many we actually applied this year, but we can get that information from other sources and put it in the Access database in order to compare the number of spot checks versus the number of applied. So that's kind of the way it was set up to work. Of course, this is the 2021 spot check that we can run through and show what's been spot checked this year. But this needs to be developed for each year. In other words, there needs to be a new list created for 2022 and in years future. Maybe if this same system is being used, it will have to be done yearly. I hope to, through this process that we're going to go through, I'm going to go ahead and create a 2022 spot checklist on SharePoint and update the database that goes with it so you can see how that needs to be done. So that's kind of the setup of the system. Now, the first thing that you'll need to know is, okay, where do I get this database? And you can actually, this database is put on the administrative services part of SharePoint. If you go into quality assurance documents, there is a spot check access database folder. I can go to that database, and here is a zipped access database that has the database and some other files that you will need for using this system. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to go ahead and download this database. It's going to ask me where if I want to open it or if I want to save it. I want to do a save as, and then I'm going to save this on my desktop under the 2022 spot checks. So this database, I mean, this zip file is going to be downloaded to my computer. And if I look at my desktop and go to the spot check, you'll see that I now have that zip database on my desktop. So I can't run it directly from a zip file, but I can actually open this zip file, and you'll see there's actually 3 different files, and I'm just going to select those 3 files, and since to unzip it, all I've got to do is move it to a folder. Let's see, I'm gonna go back. Let me go back in there and do that again. So I'm going to select those files, and then I'm going to actually drag those files into, let's see, I'm going to do it here under my desktop. I'm going to drag those files to this spot check folder. So when I do that, it moves it out of the zip into basically just the files are there now. So I still have the zip file, but really the ones I'm going to use are this spot check database. The practice summary import and the spot check SharePoint list are just Excel spreadsheets. Anytime we update that database with current data, we will use this practice summary import. So that's basically how you can get a copy of the database. I'll pause there for a second and see if there's any questions. Okay. Then I would just go in and open this Access database. And I don't know if either of you are familiar with Access databases, but it's fairly simple. The way it works, it's kind of set up. I'm going to enable the content, and I'm going to go ahead and make it a trusted document. Now, the way the database works is there is a practice summary table, a practices table, a service center table, and there is a link to this SharePoint spot checks. So this Access database does not actually have a table of the spot checks. It just has a link to the SharePoint. The good thing about that is anytime anybody updates something on the SharePoint list, it shows up in this database. So it's kind of a live version. It actually links to the spot check or SharePoint spot checks and uses that data. And if you open this table, you'll see that the table pretty much matches what was shown on SharePoint. Now, it may be sorted a little differently, but anytime anybody adds to the SharePoint list, it will show up in this table. The practices summary table. This table is created from IDEA. It actually is the applied practices for Arkansas for 2021. This was downloaded September 30th to show all the practices that were installed by Service Center in Arkansas in 2021. So you can see it's quite an extensive list. It's basically just a summary of the number that was reported. For example, this first one here in Arkadelphia was a 512, and there were actually 3 basically fields that were applied of this 512. So, and again, that's why, you know, those, it could have been one plan, it could have been 3 different plans. You don't really know, and it doesn't really matter as long as we spot check the proper number. So that's the practice summary. It has to be updated occasionally. Usually I update it once a quarter. So as we go through the fiscal year, this table has to be updated. You do that by going into IDEA and exporting the information out. We'll go into that process in a little bit. So that's the practice summary table. The other table is the practices table. This is just a list of the practices that we do in Arkansas. And the only ones that will show up in the reports are actually practices on this list. So even though there are practices that have been applied, if you look at practice summary, you may see that there are other practices like these CSP practices that show up as practices that we've applied, but they're not actually practices, they're enhancements. And the report only will show practices that are on this table. And since the CSP practices are not in this table, they won't show up on the final reports. The other table that you need to be aware of is the Service Center table. This is just a list of our service centers. And what this is used for, it uses this list to determine which area each field office is in. So it can actually, you know, you can run reports by area, and it's based on this table to know that Arkadelphia is in the south area and Ash Flats in the northeast, etc. All right, so basically the main thing that is critical in this table is the reports. So the reports down here are what we will use to create, you know, what status we're at as far as the spot checking. So the first one we can look at is the applied practices report. And you can do this by area. If you want to just see a particular area, you can just type in the code for the area, and it will tell you in the Northwest area how many practices were applied, or how many numbers of each practice were applied. So for example, in the Northwest area, there were 24 fences applied, 40 fire breaks, 69 feral swine, etc. You can actually, if you want to do it for all areas, you can just type in an asterisk and it will bring up the number for the Northeast area, and then the Northwest area, and then the South area. So it shows how many practices are applied for each area. Probably the most common report that we can run is this area applied versus checked. When you run this report, you can do it for a particular area. So I'm just going to choose the Northwest area, and it goes through, the database will go through, and from the practices, the practice summary table, it will count how many practices were applied for the Northwest area. So in this case, the Northwest area applied 15 forest management plans. It calculates, okay, for 5%, I would need to check one of those. And then this number checked actually comes from the SharePoint spot check list. So it goes through, and if any practices, any 106s were spot checked in the Northwest area, then it will show the number checked. And it also lists the number that don't meet specifications, without adequate documentation, the incorrect quantity, and the conflict with program policy. And it calculates the percentage that have been spot checked. So in this case, in the Northwest area, we applied 15 106s. We needed to spot check at least one of those to get our 5%, but we actually checked 2 of them, so we're at 13%. So you can see the percentages of the practices that have been spot checked. Another report that you can run is the spot check deficiencies. And basically it just goes through and lists all the practices by field office that had something written in this description of deficiencies. So you can see these are the deficiencies that show up for the different offices. This is, basically by field office, the practice 382. In Russellville, there was some problems with that. So you can see that's kind of the way the deficiencies work. The other thing that you can look at is the corrective actions. And when you do that, it's going to ask you for a field office, and you can type in the field office, or you can actually type in part of the field office and put a asterisk by it, which matches things. So this is the spot check corrective actions report for Russellville. It shows that there was an animal mortality facility. This is the client, the contract number. Does it need corrective actions? Yes. Gives a description of deficiency, what needs to be done to fix that, and if those corrective actions have been completed. And if they had, there would be something in here. It also shows that this was certified by Wes and spot checked by Brian. So that information is available so that you can see, who might need to be involved with making sure this is corrected. So, for example, if we have a deficiency here for this particular item, the field office could complete the corrective actions, and when they did so, they would let Brian know that it has been fixed. Brian would go back to the SharePoint list, find this particular spot check that he's completed, and change the corrective actions to yes, and put in a description of those corrective actions. When you do that, then it would not show up on the, there is a list here of spot checks, corrective actions needed but not completed. So you could actually, there is a state spot check corrective action also. I'm just going to put all areas, and it will bring up all the different corrective actions that's needed listed by field office so that you can see which ones of these are needed. This could be sent out to the field office. The field office could complete the actions, let whoever know that this action has been completed, and then the person that entered this spot check could go back and update that the corrective actions were completed and a description of those. And basically the way you would do that is, for example, this is a 313 for Clarksville. I could go back to the SharePoint list. And maybe I want to filter it by 313. So now I see all the 313s that have spot checked. And maybe I want to go over here to the service center, and I'm going to filter it to show Clarksville and hit apply. And so now I only see that one spot check that needs to be fixed. Corrective actions are needed. Yes. Corrective actions level. Corrective actions have been completed. No. I could actually select this one, go into edit, change this corrective actions completed to yes, and describe the actions that they took. And in that way, it would go off the list of the ones that weren't completed. So that's kind of the way the system can be used. I don't know how much people have used that in the past, but it is a way that we can get the information out of the database to actually, I know a lot of times we do spot checks and we find problems, but a key thing is to make sure those problems get fixed. And sometimes I think we drop the ball on some of that. So anyway, that's kind of the way the system works. I will stop for a second and see if y'all have any questions at this point.
Well, I think you're gonna explain this, but or I guess are you gonna show us how these reports are made in Access?
I really hadn't went into a lot of, well, you mean as far as creating a new report?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I really hadn't planned on doing that because that's pretty much a pretty detailed Access task.
Okay.
Pretty much the ones I think that are probably mostly needed are already here.
Right.
Just, the state spot check deficiencies. You can look at these different reports that show, the different deficiencies that have shown up through spot checking. You know, I've tried to come up with as many reports as I thought was needed without making it too cumbersome.
Right.
Pretty much the main report that you're going to want to look at is basically this area applied versus checked. You can actually look at another report that might be handy is this spot check summary, which will give you, let me see, I don't know if this is going to do search. Which will give you a report of all the spot checks that were done for Russellville.
Right. Okay.
Whether they're good, bad, indifferent. So you could print this report for, Russellville to store in their spot check information. Again, probably, look at the deficiencies, look at the corrective actions. If you see some that need corrective actions, that might be where I would, go in and say, okay, well, it looks like Clarksville has some. I probably want to run a corrective actions report for Clarksville. So then it would show these are the things that need to be done for Clarksville. So, this needs to be sent to Clarksville. They need to figure out, well, did I fix that? If they did, then they should let Richard know, and Richard should go in there and update that corrective actions have been completed.
Okay.
So, yeah, I don't have, I wouldn't really plan on going into showing how reports are done because it's kind of complicated going through these queries and all that, but
I can
that's,
YouTube something.
yeah. So, all right. So that's kind of the way the reports work. So this is basically this 2021 spot check database will not have to be updated to bring in practices because we're past 2021. The practices are up to date as of September 30th. So it won't have to be updated, but hopefully more people will add spot checks. For example, if I go in here to the area applied versus checked, let me close that. That's not a query. I want to do this report. Area applied versus checked. If you look at the Northwest area, you can see that, we're in pretty good shape. There's a few that haven't been spot checked, but we're in pretty good shape. However, if you look at, say, the Northeast area, you can see that, they're working on it, but there's still quite a few of these that have not been completed. So that kind of gives you an idea, Northeast area still needs some more spot checking done. So hopefully in the next couple months, they will start adding to these spot checks. At some point, and I don't even remember the exact date, I know there's a quality assurance plan where spot checks have to be done and all that by a certain date. So, hopefully this information will increase. So if I basically, to determine, if the spot check's done for the area, you just have to run that report for each area. And usually what I do is once a quarter, I will run this report and export this to PDF. You can just go here to external data, hit PDF, and it will export it to a PDF document, and you can just email that to, the certain area or whatever. So usually, once a quarter, I'll run these reports to show how many's been applied, how many's been checked, etc. And again, each quarter I have to update this practice summary because as we go through the year, people install more practices. So that's kind of the way it works. And it is a manual process that you go through to update this practice summary. So 2021 is pretty much, the data is all in there. It's just that people need to finish spot checks and we need to run these reports to make sure our spot checks get done, and probably run some of these corrective actions reports to make sure that if they've fixed something, we go back and document that it's been fixed. And that's all done on SharePoint. All right. So we've got 2021, the SharePoint site is ready. People can go in and add to it. But what happens when we start looking at 22 spot checks? So this will be the process for updating these things for 2022. The first thing we need is we need a spot check list for 22 that is not on there. So we could create a list, and I'm going to go into the list button, and you'll see that, I've got a whole bunch of lists. I've got 18, 19, 20, 21 spot checks. Now I am going to create a new list for 22. And I'm going to create that new list from an existing list. So I will select an existing list and I'm going to check the 21 spot check list. Then I can click next. And in this case, I'm going to call this the 2022 spot checks. It's going to show it over here in our navigation. I'm going to go ahead and hit create. So now I have a 2022 spot checks that is basically a blank list, but it's just like the 21 list. I could go in and add a new item to this 2022 checklist as I spot check practices in 22. So we have no spot checks have been done for 2022, but we have the list there. You can also, depending on permissions in SharePoint, I'm going to move this up to there and save that. So now the 2022 spot checks shows up there. I go back to the engineering site, and now we see that 2022 spot check shows up on our list. And of course, we go to that list, there's nothing there. So the 2022 list has been created. It only has to be created once. It's created for 2022. You won't have to do anything else for 2022. However, if you decide to use this system for 23, somebody may need to update this information. Now, the spot check list has been updated, but we still have the database that is linked to 21 list. So the way I'm going to fix that is I'm going to just copy this database and paste it. So now I have a copy of that 21 list. I'm going to change the name of it to 22 Spot Check Database. Take that copy off there because it's not really a copy now. It's the actual 22 Spot Check Database. So now I have a 22 Spot Check database that I can run. So if I open it, it's going to, I'm going to enable the content, and it's going to show the same information, except that our practice summary still has the 21 practices in it. And our spot check list is still looking at the 21 list. So we're going to change that. First thing we're going to do is change this list. It's not the 21 list. And we go to database tools. Let's see, I have a hard time. Oh, it's under external data. I'm going to the linked table manager. This table is a linked table. It's linked to the SharePoint list. So I'm going to click on it, and you can see that it is linked to the 21 spot checks. So I'm going to click that, select that list, and hit relink. Now it's the original site is the SharePoint spot check. And now I am going to link it to the 22 spot check list and click OK. Now that list is linked to the 22 spot checks. So if I click close and then I open that spot check, it is blank because there are no items on the 22 spot check list because nobody has completed a spot check yet. So this database is now linked to the 22 list on SharePoint. You just need to make sure that when you create this, when you go through this process, the first thing you need to do is create a new list so you can link it to the new list. Practices should stay the same. Service centers should stay the same. The practice summary still has the 21 data in there. And we're going to fix that by here. There is a query that will clear this practice summary. And we're about to run a delete query. And when we say yes, you're about to delete 589 rows, and we will say yes. And then now the practice summary table is also blank. So now we have a SharePoint list that is blank. There's nothing on it. There is a practice summary that is blank. There is no data entered for the practice summary. Practices will still say the same. Service centers will still say the same, but your practice summary and your SharePoint spot checks are now set up for 22. However, we need to, and this is something that you will do basically routinely through the year, maybe once a quarter, maybe more often if you want to. Whenever you want to do that, we have got to populate the number of applied practices that have been put in Arkansas. And the way that we will do that is in this table or in this set of documents, there is a practice summary import table. This practice summary import table is an Excel spreadsheet that's basically blank, but it has the correct data format for importing into this database. So it's a blank table or blank spreadsheet that we will use to import the data. So where do we get that data? Well, you have to go to IDEA. You need to go back to that my main screen. IDEA is not on this page. I'm going to close this because I know it opened up in the right place if I just open it directly. So under this state field and technical tools, there is an IDEA link. I will go to IDEA. Brings me into IDEA. I first have to log in. Once I log into IDEA, and you may have to e-authenticate if you haven't already. Now I have the option of running reports from IDEA. So I'm going to click on reports. And the report that we need is this practice summary report. So I click practice summary, and you want to set the report level by service center. State is Arkansas. We want all service centers, and we want a quick search of all applied practices, and then change the year to the current year, in this case 22. So if I do this, it will give me a report of all, or a summary report of all the applied practices that have been applied in 2022. So I just click report. Now, reports are formatted a little differently in IDEA. And what I want to do is I want to export this data to an Excel spreadsheet. And I'm just going to open that Excel spreadsheet. When I do that, you will see that IDEA does some weird things with the formatting of the report. What you need to do is, first of all, delete all the rows above this header information. So I'm going to select all those rows, and I'm going to right click and delete. And for some reason or other in IDEA, notice there's not a column B. Well, there is, it's just some of these columns are merged together. So what I want to do is I want to unmerge all of the columns, and I do that by clicking right here on this cell and just click merge and center. And when I do that, it unmerges all the data into just a simple spreadsheet. And you can import this directly into Access, but I found it's a little better if I just highlight all of these cells all the way down to the bottom, and as the year goes by, they will get more lines of data, and just highlight the data rows and copy that by either right clicking and copy, or I'm just going to press Control C. Okay, what's going on here? My multiple. I have a problem with it being merged, I guess, still. I copied it that time. So basically, I've just copied all that data from that spreadsheet. Now I'm going to go back to my practice summary import, click the first cell, and paste that data in there. So now I have the data copied from that spreadsheet, pasted into a formatted spreadsheet for the import into Access. So I'm just going to go ahead and save this. So now that practice summary import table, I can just close the. And if we look at this practice summary import table, it now has the data in it that we will need. So my next step is to go back to the Access database, and we see that, you know, this information, if you look at the practice summary, there's nothing in there. But we're going to go to external data. Once you do this, you can actually save this import and redo it again. But I'm actually going to choose new data source, and I'm going to import it, or import the data from an Excel file. So I'm going to browse to where I saved that file, which is on my desktop, under the spot checks. So there's the practice summary import table. So I'm going to open that. And what you want to do is you don't want to import it into a new table. You want to append it to the practice summary table. Because remember, the practice summary table is empty now. I'm going to append the records from that Excel spreadsheet into this practice summary. So I click OK. It tells me it's currently open, which it is, and it'll close it. So I'm going to say yes. And it shows the data that you're importing from that spreadsheet. And I just click next and import to table practice summary and finish. You can save these import steps. If you do it one time, then you can actually use the saved imports to run it again. The only problem with that is the spreadsheet has to be in exactly the same folder as it was when you imported it this time. So, you know, when you do this the first time, you have to do it manually, but once you do it manually, you can update that spreadsheet and it'll do it automatically if you save the import steps. So I'm not going to save those. I hit close, and then if I open up this practice summary, it shows all those records for 2022 that we copied from IDEA. So you can see there's practices that are already been applied in 2022. So no spot checks have been done, but I can now run this area applied versus checked, and I'm going to do the Northwest area. And as of today, the Northwest area has put in those practices. I think that area, let's see, practice summary. So hopefully, you know, all this information, once you've updated it, it will show the new reports and give you that information. And again, you know, this process is just something that, you know, once a quarter, once, I don't know, every month or whatever, it needs to be updated from IDEA. All right, so that kind of gives an idea on the process. Basically, you know, the SharePoint list now has been created, and the spot check database has been created for 2022.
So
it will need to,
you need to add a practice like that new wildlife habitat practice, you know, was adopted in Arkansas last year, I think. So what do we, if we do adopt another practice in the coming years, how do we add that to the practices list?
Well, those practices, of course, will automatically show up in the practice summary because they are reported. But if you need to add a practice that you need to show up on the list, you just go into this table. Yeah, this one actually has, is that 420? Yeah, it's already been added. But if you need to add a new practice, you know, just go down to the last line, click in the practice number, the practice name, units, and high risk, and then just close it, and it'll ask you if you want to save it. So yes, you can add practices to this list.
All right, understood. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Now, I will tell you, if you do that, there is also on SharePoint, if you go to the engineering site and go to the spot check list on SharePoint and you create a new new spot check. Also, the practice code is looked up here also. So for example, 420, and see 420 is not on this list, which is not a good thing. Unless it's down here at the bottom, if we added it at the bottom. No. So 420, so you couldn't record a spot check for 420, even though we have practices. And the way to update that is if you look at this practice code, I'm going to go to, let me close this. So I'm going to go to the list settings, and it tells me that the practice code is a choice. And the practice code, you can edit that practice code choice, and you can see it has a list of all the practices in the list. So if you need to add a new practice to this list, you can also just type it in here, and then you would save that. So now if I go back to the spot check and create a new one and hit practice code, 420 should show up on the list now. So even if you add a practice, you have to add it to the database to get it to print in the reports, but you also need to add it to the SharePoint choices so that if somebody comes in and spot checks a 420, they can actually select that they spot checked a 420. So there may be some manipulation that has to be done on the spot check list itself.
Thank you.
All right. So again, the reports, you can run those. Again, you will have to do some updating on, the practice summary once a quarter, but this spot check database for 2022 should be ready to go. And I will upload this 2022 version to SharePoint, and that way if y'all need to download it. I did notice a little problem. I'm gonna have to check on something with the counting of these practices, so I may have to do a little work on the database both for 21 and 22 to make sure they work correctly, but I will get that fixed and upload a new version of the 21 and the 22 databases. Okay, any other questions? I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording of this, and I will share this recording when it's done, and that way if anybody needs to go back and rewatch some of it, they can.